Okay, hopefully everyone has been able to join today's World Café series. Good morning, good afternoon, welcome. My name is Hannah Brinston and I will be chairing and moderating today's World Café series. I'm the Director of Policy at the World Obesity Federation, and I'm also a work package leader in both the STOP and Cocreate projects, who are two of the organisers of this series. As many of you know, the World Café series has been brought to you through the collaboration of 4 projects: STOP, Cocreate, PEN, and Best-ReMaP, all of which have been funded by the European Commission to address different aspects of childhood obesity and the environments that we live in. The collaboration is an opportunity to share findings and experiences, and in turn increase the impact of each of the projects by sharing and drawing on each other's learnings and findings. I don't need to remind you all of the challenge we are faced with today. Childhood obesity, and indeed adult obesity, is rising in most countries in Europe and around the world. Where it is levelling off, it remains at high levels. Childhood obesity has many roots, many drivers, and many complications. And we need to really be taking it extremely seriously. We need to act now to prevent and treat obesity throughout the life course in Europe and around the world. Projects such as those that are collaborating today are vital to aid our understanding of obesity and how we translate that understanding into policy at the national level in order to reduce obesity. For this last event of the World Café series, we are joined by the project coordinators of the 4 projects, who are going to reflect on how we have come along in obesity research in the last decade, and we're going to discuss key research questions that remain and how we can take action on these moving forward. A few housekeeping points before we kick off to today's discussion. Today's event, like the other World Café series, is going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing the recordings with all of you after the session. If you're new to the World Café series or have missed one of them, we will also be sending out the links to the previous recordings. While we're talking, particularly in the discussion, please do use the Q&A function to post any questions you have for the panelists, and we'll either try and answer them today or we'll get back to you with some answers. Also, if anyone posts a question and you want to kind of contribute to that, please do use the Q&A function for that purpose as well. This is really collaborative, and on something as important as childhood obesity, we all need to be learning from each other. So for today's agenda, we're going to start with a quick recap and insights from the World Café events that we've had so far, before going into a panel discussion about Europe's research and infrastructure for childhood obesity, where we've come and where we need to go. And then we're going to finish with just looking to the future about what the next steps are with each of the collaborating projects. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Moitza Gabrielcic, who is the coordinator of the Joint Action Best-ReMaP project. She's a medical doctor and a specialist of public health with an interest and expertise in nutrition, physical activity, and more recently in aging. She is head of the Center for Analyses and Development of Health at the National Institute of Public Health in Slovenia. Over to you, Moitza.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So for the brief summary of what has been talked about in the first World Café on improving food and physical activity environments, we had, in fact, the World Café composed of the 2 topics. One was exploring the practices in reducing marketing of unhealthy food products to children, and the second one on the public policies for improving physical activity, what can we do about the physical activity policy monitoring tools, and also to highlight health inequalities within that. And in the first part of the World Café, our Portuguese colleague from Joint Action Best-ReMaP was speaking about what we are doing in Best-ReMaP in regard to reducing marketing foods to children, how the member states, the 24 EU member states together, are trying to improve the implementation of actions and propose more harmonized actions in this area. And we came up with those key policy recommendations that we need to introduce more of the mandatory legislation. So that will be discussed for the next 2 years and really explored by member states. Then we are forming intersectoral working groups. That's very helpful in this area. Then we have to use more UN Convention on Rights of the Child to implement measures that protect children up to 18 years. Then when speaking about marketing, nothing new, that we have to be as holistic as possible and also think of exposure and power. But what I think it's most important that we are really trying to introduce measures that include a strong nutrient profile model so that we know exactly what we're speaking about, and also that we try to strengthen monitoring and enforcement of the system so that we understand better what is going on and where we should act more. And an interesting question appeared here about what can be done in local communities, because that is cross-border issue. Yes, of course, awareness, education of children and parents or caregivers, that's very important and could be also part of the story. And the second part of the first World Café was added from the PEN consortium. There were 3 members presenting what PEN is doing. So they were really discussing how to assess food nutrition and physical activity policies using the Informas approach. I have to say that there was a lot done in this area in Europe. So how to assess how successfully the policies have been implementing. Then the range of indicators was developed there. And also what I think it's very interesting and very important too, that the development of the physical activity environmental policy index has been part of the tasks in PEN. And at least in Slovenia, we are looking very much forward that this index will be finalized, because we have used Food EPI for the assessment of our national nutrition policy, and we will do the same with the physical activity one when it's available. What are the key takeaways from this PEN part of the event? That physical activity interventions we can usually find in school settings, that there is quite a lot of existing evidence for support activities, but we have to be cautious about one-size-fits-all approach. There is no unified methodology for evaluating policy implementation, but this is really the priority, how to develop that, so that we will be able to maximize translation into practice. And also the sport policies can be useful, but there are more tools to increase this approach. So it means if we provide spaces, facilities, if we use voucher programs, subsidies or whatever, but still not be too pushy to the people, so that we do not, on the other side, undermine such efforts. And the specific question was related to that, how to reach hard to reach populations, so how to address equity within this scope, and also the role of the targeting activities of the upstream causes. So really how to address inequalities, that was a part of the discussion there, and the proportional universalismus of the actions was highlighted. It was also mentioned as an interesting point that moving database was developed in World Cancer Research Fund within Cocreate, and PEN is coming up with the physical activity policy index, a bit overlapping activities, but both together can serve aligned as a very good resource, one giving the information about the policies that have been established, and the other one about the policies which have been implemented. That's very short. I hope that was okay.
Thank you very much, Mike. So that was perfect. It's always hard to summarize a whole hour's webinar in just 5 minutes. But I think you've highlighted some important points that we can come back to when we have our discussion in a moment. So I'm actually going to go straight on to our next speaker, who is Franco Sassi, who is the coordinator of the STOP project. He's Professor of International Health Policy and Economics at Imperial College London, where he's also Director of the Centre for Health Economics and Policy Innovation. Over to you, Franco.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome to our audience today. I will just summarize very briefly, as you said. I mean, it's difficult to catch a very rich discussion that took place at the end of June in a webinar that was focusing on the root causes of the childhood obesity pandemic. We use the same term as we use for COVID-19 because it has clearly been expanding at a very large scale as COVID-19 has been, and at the same time we believe that there are factors that influence the spread of childhood obesity that are acting very similarly to, how a virus spreads. So effectively, there are, there is a transmission, which is a social transmission. It's not, the same kind of transmission as a virus, but it is really, fueling the epidemic and leading it to being a leading, key public health challenge today. And this is, really what we've been exploring, the causes of this epidemic and the reasons why, we are facing such a major, wave of childhood obesity in many countries worldwide. And the key aspects that we focused on are very well represented in this cartoon that you see on the screen. So starting from the left-hand side of the picture, essentially we looked at prenatal and early life influences because these have been neglected for a very long time, but they're increasingly emerging as a leading driver of childhood obesity. Essentially, what we have discussed in the webinar through a number of presentations was precisely the idea that there is a mother-to-child or a parents-to-child transmission of childhood obesity that is not genetic or not entirely genetic. And it's largely, in fact, non-genetic. And this is due to the environments in which parents live, particularly mothers, but also, various types of exposures that happen, during pregnancy, possibly even before pregnancy, and at the time of the child's birth, that affect the probability of developing obesity during childhood. And the way we have tried to prove this is by using a set of innovative biomarkers that are, the latest development in scientific research. That they are from epigenetics and metabolomics. They basically can identify biological changes at the molecular level that are already visible in cord blood. So when the child is born, and they allow us to link exposures that happen before the child is born to outcomes that typically become visible only later in life during childhood. And we've used a wide range of biomarkers to elucidate the causal pathways that link those early life exposures or even prenatal exposures to childhood obesity. The second aspect we've been looking at is the influence of the built environment. So the built environment is how many people refer to the set of environmental influences that affect children's diet and physical activity. And we looked at evidence, particularly at the school level, in the school environment, that really have a major influence on children's behaviors and eventually the body mass index and probability of being overweight or obese and the later outcomes that will follow during the life course. A cross-cutting element to all of this that came up in multiple presentations is socioeconomic status and the way in which socioeconomic status affects exposures in terms of differences in the environment to which children of low socioeconomic status are exposed relative to children of higher socioeconomic status, and also the kind of prenatal and early life influences that typically differ between different socioeconomic groups. And this creates a vicious circle of disadvantage and exposure to factors that make obesity increasingly likely, that really needs to be broken if we want to stop the childhood obesity epidemic. I stop there.
Thank you very much, Franco. I think you've raised some really important points there around the complexities of obesity and really some of the really important areas that we need to do some further research on. So we can touch upon that again in a moment. So finally, in this first section, I'm pleased to introduce Knutinga Klapp, who's the coordinator of the Cocreate Project. He's the executive director of the Division of Mental and Physical Health at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and he will be reflecting on the last World Café series. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, and the last webinar we had focused really on how to engage and involve the young people in prevention of obesity. And as we already heard now, there's so many different drivers of obesity, and we also see that these are present even at the early life stages. So this is one of the reasons why we talk about obesity as a wicked or very complex problem with multiple causes across a number of different sectors. And these causes tend to interact with each other, and that's why we are asking to have more of a holistic or systems approach to obesity prevention, trying to achieve coherence across different policies, policy measures. But when we in the Cocreate project then try to assess the literature to see what is the evidence base for effective prevention measures, we saw that largely we're lacking good studies for most of these different causes. Where we find a fairly large body of literature is related to school. So school-based interventions is the area where there has been a lot of research over the years. But also this body of research to a large extent lack proper involvement or engagement of young people. So what we find is that the literature very often focus on single interventions. And very often when the literature is being summarized, studies that try to implement multiple interventions are excluded because the main goal is really to see what are the single most effective interventions. And this is in stark contrast to what we see that the young people themselves perceive. So when we in Cocreate ask them what are the drivers of obesity, they draw large complex system maps where they see that different arenas, different factors are really involved. They focus, of course, a lot on what is that drive their eating behaviors and physical activity, but they also look at mental health as important factors to address when we're looking at obesity prevention. So within the Cocreate project, we tried out different methods then for involving youth, engaging them in both assessing the problem and also pointing to what might be useful policy measures or intervention to address the problem. And the figure you see right here is based on a dialogue forum that we have where young people then are able to share their ideas and discuss them with different stakeholders from different sectors of society. Could be decision makers, policy makers, educators, from private industry and so forth. And because of the COVID pandemic, we had to change this dialogue fora from in-person event to a dialogue forum done digital. And here you can see how each of these figures at the bottom are representing different actors participating in the dialogue fora and some of the ideas that they are conveying. So the take-home message from this World Café was that adolescents can and should be involved both in our efforts to understand the drivers of obesity and also to propose relevant policy measures that could help address the problem. And finally, we also think it is important for them to be involved and guide the implementation of different measures. And within Cocreate, then we have tested and are able to point to some methods that can be useful in order to achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for that summary. Those of you who haven't been able to join us for the previous World Café series, hopefully that just gives you a bit of a flavour of what we've discussed. And as I mentioned previously, if you want to watch them in full, you will be sent the link after today. So I'm going to move straight on to the discussion, as I think we've already started to kind of touch upon some of the research questions, research gaps, and also the progress that we've been making over the last decade and more on childhood obesity in Europe. For this part of today's session, I'm also pleased to welcome Wolfgang Ahrens, who is the coordinator for the PEN project, and he will be joining us for today's discussion. So if all panelists, if you could please put on your camera. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be discussing, as I said, some of the research questions, what remains answers, but I think also reflecting on how far we've come, because I think we have come a long way in the last 10 years, and it's important to also kind of welcome that and sort of be thankful for the research that has been done. I'm going to first start with Franco, I think, and the STOP project is structured around quite a vast range of considerations related to childhood obesity. There's a bit of epigenetics, but then there's also questions around sort of policy and some of the contextual factors related to policies. So I was wondering whether you could reflect on, firstly, how far you think we've come with research, some of the new areas, but also what you think are some of the outstanding issues, themes that we maybe need to research moving forward, or some of the new areas that you're expecting to come out of STOP.
Thank you, Anna. I'm happy to give some initial thoughts and start the discussion. I think as far as STOP is concerned, in particular, the foundations of STOP are essentially multidisciplinary. I mean, the idea that we had when we designed the STOP proposal was that really, as Nutinga was explaining earlier, obesity is a multifactorial problem. I think he defined it as a wicked problem that is almost unsolvable if you look at it, from a traditional policy perspective. And really to crack this problem, we need the contributions of a very large range of disciplines. We need to bring the social sciences together with the natural and biological sciences. We need to understand the nutrition mechanisms as well as the underlying biology that really drives weight gain outcomes in children, as well as the interactions with the environment that are actually triggering that weight gain and the physiological mechanisms that create that. So we have tried in STOP to bring together scientists from multiple disciplines to think what the solutions could be to the root causes of obesity. And in doing this, we have very soon realized that the root causes of obesity, and that is what one of the webinars is focused on, as I illustrated previously, are not so well known, and there is a lot of research to be done on the causes of obesity that has not yet been done. I mean, the science behind epigenetics and metabolomics that we're using today to elucidate those causal pathways, it is still in its infancy. I mean, the work that we have done in STOP, I think, is really pioneering in the sense that we've been trying for the first time to apply these new approaches to childhood obesity or to children more generally, which is something that had not been done before, and we've only been able to scratch the surface of this. There are a number of policy areas in which I think we have pretty established evidence of how useful policies can be, government policies can be in addressing childhood obesity. But there are also areas that have become clearer and clearer since we submitted the STOP application, which is now a few years back in the past, that are really critical in childhood obesity, and we cannot continue to ignore. I mean, one of them is, for instance, the digital transformation that is affecting our children's lives in a tremendous way, and research is still pretty much at ground zero in terms of understanding the impacts of the digital technologies that children are using for the most part of their lives, not just in their spare time, but also in the way their families and their parents purchase food, in the way we organize our daily routines and so on. So our understanding in that area is very limited at the moment, and this is something that I think our project has not been able to dig, deep enough into. So that is part of the research agenda that I think we are facing for the future. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to add, further insights during the discussion.
Thank you, Franco. That was very interesting, and I think your comments about the digital world are very, very pertinent. But I think also the comments about how things change so rapidly, and as researchers trying to kind of keep up with what's evolving around us can be quite challenging. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look at when we're looking at how we prioritize what we research and then how that translates into policy. There's a lag there, and that can cause challenges. So I'm going to move to Knutinga and Moitza, I think. You both work at a national level, and I'd be interested to hear your take on how research informs what you're doing, but some of the research gaps that you sort of see in terms of how that translates into policy. So kind of move away from the research specifically, and actually what do you need at a national level to kind of help drive forward the policies? I don't know who wants to go first. Moitza, do you want to go first?
Yes, of course. I think I would just echo what Franco said in the beginning of his intervention, that interference among different drivers of obesity and understanding these interferences at one side, and on the other side, how to address the complexity of the policy actions and how those policy actions are interfering, and what in this complexity is really then what outcome as the result in obesity we can see then. And I really think that we can deal it only with the system theory or something. So building all different sciences, we can think of how to approach those questions. What concretely is missing, because I'm representing here mainly Best-ReMaP, and we are the implementing member states. So it means not that much in the research, but more in what we see, what we need concretely in the project. For instance, more about the impacts of somehow improved public procurements. It means the procurements which would allow for higher quality of foods, how they really influence the health determinants and health outcomes. So for the moment, we have composed a small research group within the project because we haven't found a lot of literature and evidence in this area at the moment. It seems that a lot of new projects are appearing in this area, but not a lot is new. So that's something. But the other thing, because we are also leading the work package on stakeholders engagement in STOP, we think that we will translate as much as possible from the recommendations from there and from the STOP, Cocreate and PEN overall into the implementation in Best-ReMaP. I think that about stakeholders, it's also quite similar to what Franco said, that we are in the infancy of the research of the stakeholders landscape, as we started it in STOP with the studying of stakeholders networks, better understanding of the stakeholders landscape. We try to understand what are the drivers for the alliances among the stakeholders. If you trigger those drivers, how the alliances are decomposing and recomposing, it's very interesting. Then we have been exploring together with the stakeholders themselves the concepts of trust, transparency, evidence-based, what that means, the concept of power. It seems that there are very strong drivers behind the stakeholders engagement, and also the interplay between the soft approaches and more strict regulatory approaches when we prepare measures. It's also quite tricky, and understanding there what can we do is also important. But what I would say, otherwise, it's youth engagement, inequalities, that are the topics which really have to come always on board. Just to say maybe two things more. It's the COVID pandemic itself. So that's something what has really to be researched, because what we observe at the national level is that definitely the older population has been severely affected by the disease itself, but it seems that that the children And young parents, young families, young people are much more affected by the measures, the COVID measures. So for instance, when we ask for the financial situation has got worsened in approximately 10 to 12% of the people over 65 in Slovenia, and has worsened in more than 1/3, up to 36% in specific waves of our research in the people below 30 or 35. So it means it will have a huge impact if we speak about the drivers of obesity. But I would be optimistic at the end, saying that I remember the period 2000 to 2010 as a member state representative to WHO and to the Commission, when we have been discussing, and the main issue was it was like the dialogue of the death, because there was not enough evidence, and the evidence which was produced since 2010 gave the member states much more space for action. So I'm just looking very much forward to the further developments, because it's very promising. That much from my side for the further discussions then.
Thank you. And I think your comments about COVID are very interesting, just in terms of how actually what we're responding to, and how obesity sort of is linked to these wider issues that we don't necessarily kind of plan for or can put into research questions from 5-10 years ago. You know, they're all interacting and of interest.
Yeah, thank you.
And Nutinga, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thank you. Just to add on to what Moisa just said, in terms of social inequality, I think that really, from a national perspective, is a critical issue. And we really tried to advocate for universal measures rather than just focus on select vulnerable groups, because we think from a public health perspective, that is the most effective strategies. But there really is a lack of good studies then implement or investigating what is the impact on different socioeconomic groups when you do these universal measures. So I think that is a knowledge gap that we really should address. Also, looking at studies addressing what we could call upstream factors, so more structural policy measures, particularly in other sectors, so related to transportation and architecture, other sectors. And my last point here is that in a way, it's almost a problem that the health sector has taken so much ownership over the problem of obesity that to a much larger extent, we should engage with other sectors. In Norway, we have national public health acts from back in 2012, where the responsibility for public health was taken away from the healthcare sector and left with the mayor or the head of the municipality, who owns all the policy measures. And I think that really has changed the dynamic of how public health and primary prevention is addressed at the local level. And I would very much like to see that at a national level too, that we had better engagement across the different sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think if we want to sort of take a truly sort of systems approach, we really do need to be better at engaging those other sectors. Whereas I think often we sort of still start with health, and then we try and sort of say we're doing systems, but it's all driven by a very narrow area. And I think we do need to be better at engaging, but also encouraging other sectors to sort of realize the importance of what they can contribute to addressing obesity, because I think sometimes that knowledge isn't there, and they don't even understand that there's a role that they can play. Wolfgang, I've kind of left you sitting in the corner there. I haven't forgotten you. So PEN is very much focused on the accountability research area, and I think this is certainly an area that we've seen across the board kind of explode, if you like, over the last 10 years. Various accountability frameworks popping up in different areas, and obviously you're focusing on one of them within PEN. I'd be interested to hear from you about how that's kind of grown, and also where we need to take that and how that can help sort of address obesity, and what sort of more work is needed to make that, I guess, a useful tool, how we can use that to help address obesity.
Yes, I mean, Knut Inge just alluded to the systemic aspects of obesity, of the development, and that's what PEN, the Policy Evaluation Network, is focusing at, because we all have learned over the last decades that behavioral interventions alone will not solve the situation. We have to address the drivers of health behaviors that in turn are the causes of overweight, obesity, and other NCDs, not only obesity and overweight. So PEN is addressing this, and actually when the call was launched for this project, I was quite skeptical, because I said, well, evaluation of policies, how can we do that? We don't have the data. And that's the situation we are facing at the moment, that we are trying to make the best out of what is there in learning which policy measures are effective. We have to move away from the classical controlled approach that we use in epidemiology, where we have an intervention and a control group. When it comes to policy interventions, we need other approaches, we need other data. And there is indeed a lack of such data that allow us to evaluate policies properly. There are many initiatives all over the world, also in Europe, but we hardly know which of them are really effective and which are not. So that's one of the focal points of PEN, to provide evidence where we can derive evidence. So we have some examples like sugar taxes, or mobility plans that we are evaluating. So policies that are in place, like school policies for physical activity and nutrition, as examples. But at the same time, we are working, as you said, on the issue of accountability and benchmarking. So what are the policies that we consider best practice, and how much of these best practice policies have been achieved in the different countries? And this is an approach that we share with the STOP project, actually, and where we are complementary. So this will provide, I think, important insights, in particular because we expand this informers approach that was originally developed for nutrition to physical activity, and to the assessment of physical activity. Another aspect that is very important for us is the potential impact on social equity or inequity. So we have devoted a full work package on this to assess whether policy measures could have a detrimental effect on the social divide in terms of health behaviors and health outcomes. So that's really an important aspect. And another aspect is the implementation. Policies are launched in some countries or in some regions, but nobody takes care whether they are implemented effectively. So the gap that is there between the evidence of a policy that's in place and the effects that it causes needs to be closed by a closer look at what are the barriers and facilitators of an effective implementation of these policies. And again, this is a work package that we are focusing on. And finally, where we focus on this issue, and finally, we are addressing the question of available data. What data do we have to monitor changes over time or differences, regional differences? And we are in a situation that these data are not harmonized and often not able to assess the indicators that would be needed to assess achievement of the WHO Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to improve the situation in the area of surveillance and monitoring of health behaviors, but also of the determinants, so the upstream factors driving these behaviors. I think these are the important fields. When it comes to the question of what we need in the future in terms of research infrastructures, I would like to make the point that we do need a long-term perspectives for research, long-term research infrastructures, in order to better understand the etiology of obesity and NCDs. So the aspect that was raised by Franco, the root causes, we need long-term studies. We have some of those studies on a national level, but we don't have them on a European level, particularly not regarding children. We have the Idefixi family cohort, which is now running for more than 10 years, but we need even bigger cohorts and with a sustainable funding over periods like 10, 20, 30 years, and not those projects that are following the project logic of the Horizon 2020 or the JPI instruments that we have in Europe. We need an infrastructure, a research infrastructure that has a long-term perspective. And these cohorts, and I think that's a misunderstanding, they are not research in themselves, they are research infrastructure that facilitate the scientific work in understanding the etiology. And the biomarkers mentioned by Franco are a very, very good example for this. You need to collect the biomarkers now to store them and to observe health outcomes years later. And that's the research. So first you need the data, you need the bio samples, and then you can do the research. So this is a real lack that I see. And the other that has been mentioned already, we need a functional infrastructure to evaluate policies. So we need long-term harmonized data that allow us to describe temporal trends in relation to policy measures that have been taken. There are still quite a few research questions not appropriately addressed. One has been mentioned, it's the digitalization and health. I would like to take it broadly. I mean, we are usually focusing on marketing, but it's more than just marketing, and we don't have the instruments yet to measure appropriately, especially in children, what's going on there and how their exposure, which will be enforced actually by the Corona crisis now, what this exposure causes in terms of the social networks, but also with regards to marketing, where children are exposed and probably, I think, unprotected. In the first World Café, I said, we still have a Wild West situation in the internet. And I think this describes the situation, and we don't know what's happening there. We don't have the right instruments, we don't have the data. And finally, I would like to mention one aspect that brings us back to today and what is worrying the young generation. It's not only the young generation, me too actually, it's the climate crisis. And there are close links between the climate crisis and health issues, not only in terms of nutrition, but in terms of many other aspects. Many things that are good for the climate are also good for our health. And this link is something that I think we should make more clear and make more prominent in the discussions and also in our research.
I think that's a very good example of where different sectors need to work together and better understand the overlap, the climate and health areas. Okay, lots of very excellent points there made by all of you. You've all mentioned inequities and inequalities and various elements related to that. And I think that's a really important issue that we need to be focusing on and integrating into our research, whether it's better understanding how policies sort of interact with different groups and looking at the whole population for sort of the impact of a policy isn't always going to tell us the information that we need when we're trying to address the sort of inequalities. I don't know if any of you have any further points that you want to make on inequalities or specific research areas that you think that we should be taking forward. You know, Franco, I want to come back to you with it. Do you have any comments on inequalities and how we can sort of look to address that moving forward in our research?
I think what we need to focus on in looking at the inequality element of obesity or childhood obesity in particular is really that kind of vicious circle that I mentioned earlier. So the fact that we have women of low socioeconomic status in during their fertile years were most likely to be to have obesity or overweight. These are the women who are more likely to give birth to children who have a high probability of developing obesity during childhood, and these, will grow as, obese adults most likely, and they will, give birth to new children who will also be obese, and they will have also a higher probability of remaining in low socioeconomic status because of that condition, partly because of that condition. So it's really a vicious circle that needs to be broken, and exactly how we break that requires a range of policies, not only in prevention, because we've been focusing on prevention, of course, because that is what ideally we would like to achieve, but also in terms of mitigating the impacts of obesity, because one aspect that we tend to neglect is that the obesity epidemic has reached such a dimension that we cannot think of reducing the problem to a significant extent in the foreseeable future. So we are going to live many years with a very large number of children with overweight and obesity, and these children will have to be helped, to address the problems they're experiencing, particularly in education, that prevent them from achieving the same outcomes as other children. This is, the subject of a parallel project in which the World Obesity Federation has also been involved, that we have been running at Imperial College in parallel with STOP, that has been focusing on the extent to which obesity is hindering human capital development, particularly in education, and there are mitigation policies that need to be implemented within education systems. And I very much agree with what Nutinga emphasized, the importance of engagement across sectors and not just focusing on the health dimension of the problem. The education system needs to put in place measures to mitigate the impact on obesity on the educational attainment opportunities of children with obesity. So it's the combination of these factors that may allow us to break that vicious circle that I was describing earlier. And I think if we can manage to break that, I think we'd be well positioned to address much of the social gradient in obesity.
Thank you, Franco. So in the interest of time, we are going to have to tie up this discussion before we go to final reflections. But before we do, I want to just give the last word to Nutinga to ask him, in the context of research, what role do you think youth can play specifically in that research agenda, whether it's informing what we do or actually being involved?
Well, I think our experience in Cocreate so far demonstrate that youth really can contribute in all aspects of the research process, from helping define the problem and also to identify solutions that they think will be appropriate either in their local setting or at a national level. And then at the same time, it is important to not think of youth as one homogeneous group. There are different groups, and one thing that we really have been striving for within Cocreate is to hear the voice of different population groups, and also in different socioeconomic group. Today we have a very rich qualitative data material that we really are looking forward to be able to dive more deeply into, to see what we can pull out of lessons from that data.
Thank you. And I think it's also on a similar note, also important to recognise the role of including people with lived experience of obesity, because I think that provides an equally valuable insight into how we plan policies and implement and prioritise issues. Okay, so thank you very much for those interesting reflections. I think there's a lot of similarities in what you're saying in terms of we need to look at inequalities, we need better cross-sector collaboration, we need to be doing much more systems thinking and really trying to simplify the complexity in order to try and make our way forward. Obviously, you're all working in your specific projects, and I'm sure everyone is keen to find out what exactly it is that they can expect to come out of those projects over the coming months. So I'm going to just ask you each to very briefly let us know what we can expect. So we're going to go around who I can see on my screen. So Monica, if you want to start there, please.
Yes, thank you so much. In November, we are organizing a joint STOP and Best-ReMaP conference where we would like to show how the knowledge transfer might work. So it means the first day will be STOP, Research, Horizon 2020, and the second one, the joint action Best-ReMaP, the implementation of the same policies which we could show in the research in some cases. So in the knowledge transfer, not to set ourselves just the goals, what do we want to know and what do we want others to know, but what do we want people to remember, how do we want them to feel when they hear some information, and how do we want them then to act. So that's also what we could also research, and we would like to see also some interplay through the dialogues of stakeholders, addressing different topics, among them also the inequality one. What is the inequality among stakeholders in the sense of power of influence and so on. So it means there are a lot of different dimensions which we have discussed through over the World Café today, and we will try to put them in practice in this event, and everyone cordially invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now pass over to Knutinka. Hear about
Yeah. Earlier this month, we had a National Dialogue Forum organized in Portugal by our Portuguese partner, and it was very successful. And we're planning a number of similar fora over the next few months. And in March next year, we will have a large youth conference organized just outside Oslo. At the beginning of the project, we had a large conference called Youth Meta, organized by our youth organization partner Press, and they're responsible for this follow-up conference that we will have in March next year. And then, as I already alluded to, we are analyzing our data, and we do plan a number of activities where we will share results from the project, both with local decision makers and policy makers, and also in collaboration with the other projects present here at the European level. Thanks.
Thank you. Franco?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, STOP will also plan a number of events, is planning a number of events during the course of the year, of the coming year. I should emphasize, as everyone in this panel knows, that we've really made huge efforts to try to bring together the findings and the research that is being done in all 4 projects, because we think that we really need this critical mass to influence the decisions of policymakers and to get the action into the right direction to address childhood obesity. I think what is to be expected from STOP in the year to come is essentially a strong body of evidence on the effectiveness of different types of actions in tackling the causes of childhood obesity, and a comprehensive simulation of the impacts of scaling up those actions at the European level, which is what we hope will persuade policymakers in countries and at the European level to take action effectively.
Thank you, Franco. And finally, Wolfgang?
Yes, I think there is a slide also that summarizes the activities. If not, I can.
Can you share it, please?
But it's not necessary. First, I'd like to say that it's really a very good situation that we have this close collaboration between the different projects, different but overlapping and complementary in a way, and that's why we, as mentioned before, we are organizing events all together. The next one that we are organizing within PEN will take place within the International Society for Physical Activity and Health Conference in Canada, but it's an online event. And so you can join this one, and I will put it in the chat. Yeah, I put it in the chat so that you can see the exact date at ISPA. We will have a workshop on equity, the point that we discussed. back to back with our General Assembly on the 2nd of November. So watch out our webpage, JPI-PEN. There you can find the announcement. We will have a dissemination symposium of the Food Environment Policy Index. So that's the Informous approach in January, February. The date needs to be fixed. And we will have an expert workshop with representatives of different surveillance systems, different European surveillance systems, to take another step in the direction of harmonization of these initiatives across Europe. Probably, that's our most recent plan. This will be organized also back to back with a final symposium that was originally planned as a PEN symposium towards the end of the PEN project. But since we have this nice collaboration, we have now started plans to organize a bigger event to make an impact in Brussels in May, June next year, together with PEN, Stop, Cocreate, and the joint action Best-ReMaP. And if this will be, if we are able to do this, I think this will really make an impact, where we will have, I think, a central session, but also dedicated sessions to different topics addressed by the different projects. So again, watch out our websites. I think once the date is fixed, it will be announced across all our projects.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all for your time today. I think you've highlighted some really important questions in terms of what we need to do moving forward. I think it's very clear that there's a lot of excellent research that's been going on in obesity, that we are definitely sort of making progress in our understanding, but that also there's a lot that we don't understand. And it's really important that we recognize those gaps, and that even when we research very sort of narrow things, that we understand where that sort of fits within the system so that we can understand how it might interact. And I think collaborations like this between the projects are so important to make sure that research can kind of trickle down into other areas of work, and that we're not just working in silos and finishing projects and then moving on to the next one. I think working together like this can really help increase the impact and help get more national action, hopefully. And I look forward to kind of seeing the outputs of these 4 projects and hopefully future collaborations moving forward. I think on the screen at the moment, you can all see the websites for the 4 projects. So please do check those websites out to get more information about the projects, both in terms of what's been done already and what's going to be coming out over the next sort of 1 to 2 years, depending on when the project's finished. And there's a few more events, as Wolfgang outlined, and from the others as well. So thank you very much to everybody for joining today. It's been a pleasure to chair and moderate today, and we will look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you to World Obesity for organizing these events. It's really good that you're doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.